Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. The speaker you're going to hear in a few minutes is going to be talking about railroad tracks and trains. And then after that, I'm going to rip it apart and shed some light to you. So let's get
morning on that, but we're going to just talk about one example and hopefully carry it through our talk a little bit. The simple matter of driving across railroad tracks. We've all seen them. We do it many times. Have you ever heard the whistle blow? We all do that, right? You know, that wasn't just for romantic purposes. Back in the late 1700s, early 1800s, in the horse and buggy days, as big and ominous as those big steam locomotives were going down the tracks that they had just laid in those early days, those carriage drivers, as time went on, got a little careless. They started taking it for granted, and believe it or not, there were becoming many accidents of them crossing the railroad tracks. So the government thought they'd be wise and say, well, we'll ask that the locomotive, then the engineer, pull on that whistle, and he'll alert the people, the horse and buggy drivers, and then they'll look out. But eventually they made that a law. In fact, in 1832, it now became federal mandated, and that law is still in the books. That's why even 3 in the morning you'll hear those whistles blow. That's a federal law that be done. But they thought that would solve the problem. But you know what happened? People took it for granted. So we've seen the little white railroad crossing signs, right? Well, that's what they began to, in 1867, they said, well, now they're going to hear the whistle blow, they're going to see the signs, and surely they're going to be safety. They'll have safe. But you know what happened, right? Eventually, as time went on, people took it for granted. They failed to heed the warning. Now, we could keep going on and on about this as the years went by and problems kept coming up. And keep in mind, in those days, too, those people didn't have the distractions that we do. They didn't have cell phones, right? They couldn't text anyone. They didn't have radios. And yet these big locomotives, they tend to take them for granted. And as the years go by, it got worse. And so now we reach the point, if the brothers could pull up that little slide, we've seen this all over the world, really. If you notice there, this is what we have today, right? You'll have not only the whistle blow and the signs, but you'll have the audible clanging sounds. You've heard those. You'll see the flashing lights that will go off. The bar that actually comes down to stop people. Have you ever seen cars, though, that when that bar comes down, they drive around it? Yeah. So here it's hard to see, but there's a median. They've now put in concrete medians to try and stop people from doing that. Well, with all of these things, to help us to do the simple matter of crossing railroad tracks, has it meant that we've been safe? That have people been alerted to it? Well, just a couple of quick statistics. This is from the Federal Railroad Administration. This is from 2009 statistics. Total fatalities in 2009 were 703. 96% of those fatalities were at railroad crossings like this. 240 fatalities alone were from pedestrians walking illegally on those railroad tracks. But here's what they had to say about it, Conrail. Nearly 2/3 of all crossing accidents occurred during daylight hours. Because 2/3 of all accidents occur at crossings equipped with automatic warning devices, driver inattention is clearly the major cause. And they said that it seriously injures some 2,400 people a year in the United States alone, and those figures, they said, had not changed basically for the last 15 years. Well, friends, it doesn't seem to make sense, does it, for something so simple? And yet you and I today are faced with much more serious decisions than merely crossing railroad tracks, aren't we? It's sad that people tend to ignore those, but yet those wise reminders, those that the government's put out, and yet when it comes to us today, even Jehovah's servants can fall victim to making unwise choices, can't we? We recall that Moses, what a wise, one of the most meek of men, the Bible says, and yet look how unwisely he dealt when he was frustrated with the Israelites at Meribah. David, For years he handled Saul in the situation there, showed great humility and discernment and practical wisdom, and yet, with Bathsheba, perhaps you recall the account, how unwisely, foolishly he acted. His son, Solomon, with his own hand wrote he is not to accumulate wives for himself. But what did he do? And look how foolishly his life ended up. So that being the case, how can you and I acquire true wisdom and then really have it there for us when we need it the most? That's what this talk is really about. There's 3 basic steps that the Bible gives us to have godly wisdom, so that we can count on it. Now, why that's so important, if you'd open your Bibles, please, to Ecclesiastes chapter 7. And even for adults then, and even for people that are doing our very best to serve Jehovah, this comment is made in the first part of Ecclesiastes 7 and verse 7. He says, "But oppression can drive the wise one into madness." Now the Byingtons, if you have that on your tablet, it happens to word it this way. It says, "Denial of justice maddens a wise man and ruins a sensible man's brains." And wouldn't you agree that when the pressure is on, when our emotions are running high, we tend to fall back on our own human wisdom, don't we? So we truly need Jehovah's wisdom. So we're going to look at those 3 steps. First of all, Jehovah doesn't leave us in the dark as how to acquire his wisdom. He wants to give that to us. If you turn back to Proverbs chapter 2, please. The first of 3 steps that Jehovah gives us, Proverbs chapter 2, and notice his admonition in verse 6. He says, "For Jehovah himself gives wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and discernment." Isn't that wonderful to know? Jehovah will freely give it. But you know, one naturalist had this to say, as it relates to this, we're going to tie it in. He said that never does nature say one thing and wisdom say another. And that's very insightful, isn't it? Never does nature say one thing and wisdom say another. Now, why is that? It's because Jehovah gave instinctual wisdom, his wisdom, to plants and animals, didn't he? He just gave it to them. Does he do that for us too? Well, we won't read them, but please scan your eyes, if you would, verses 1 through 5. In fact, notice what he says there in those verses. In fact, we'll go ahead and read it. It says, "My son, if you accept my sayings and treasure up my commandments, by making your ear attentive to wisdom, inclining your heart to discernment, moreover, if you call out for understanding and raise your voice for discernment, and if you keep seeking for it as for silver, you keep searching for it as for hidden treasures." So, action's required on our part, isn't it? We can't just sit back like the birds and the bees and just expect Jehovah to give us his wisdom. But this shows that true effort is taken from us. Jehovah expects to see us put forth effort to get his wisdom. Action terms. And so when we think about that, when we look at ourselves, how much effort do we put forth in acquiring God's wisdom? The mere fact that we're here this morning shows we put forth some effort, isn't it? And that's a good thing. It shows that we're putting forth, we're calling out, we're asking, we're searching for wisdom. How often have we been told, perhaps from the stage or in your reading, to read the Bible daily? Right? We hear it all the time, don't we? And that being the case, when we hear something like that, do we end up kind of taking it for granted after a while? Is it like that whistle that blows from the engineer at the train? We hear it off in the distance, but it just kind of, we don't pay attention? Or does it cause us to stop and look at ourselves? Perhaps if we thought of the last maybe 5-6 months is a good way to look back. None of us will do it perfectly, but how have we done when it comes to putting forth effort the last 6 months? We're often encouraged, as Hebrew 10:24 says, to not forsake the gathering together, right?
From this guy's talk, he mentioned that in the history of trains. People trying to get over to the other side, and they are getting killed by trains, which we know, because I remember in my memory, not too far from where I used to live, there was an area that somebody lost their life on a train track because they refused to obey the warning signs of the train. He made very interesting points that they had to do better things to keep people and the ones also driving in their vehicles, to make them wiser to not to go on the train tracks when an oncoming train is coming. Now, what I'm going to do, Jehovah's Witnesses, you have been taught to, no matter how dangerous this world is, just like those train tracks, you are obligated to keep moving forward no matter how dangerous anything is, for your religion, for your false god Jehovah, and everything. So you are mentally in your mind trying to break man's law when they put up warning signs like the internet, the news media, and everything else to tell you that on the other side where you think it is paradise, and on the other side is the government of the new world of going to be Jehovah's Witnesses. It's nothing but a fantasy, misguided information by your governing body. But you're dying to get to the other side, to see for yourself. The warning signs is in front of you. We have gained that wisdom which he mentioned of knowing when something makes sense or something's a lie, when something is real, something is fantasy. And that is the fantasy part of you believing what we used to believe this was God's organization, God's truth. So y'all see through that picture that he put up for a couple of minutes of how they tried their best. The arm, the flashing lights, to warn people, do not go past this point. Jehovah's Witnesses, we're doing the same thing for you. Do not go any further, because Watchtower is going to destroy you, your life, and the hope what you think you're going to get, it's not even real. How can you disagree of the evidence when the train's approaching, the whistle, the lights, the arm, everything? That's the same thing the internet has done for many Jehovah's Witnesses. It has warned them there's something wrong with the Watchtower. Something needs to be changed. And you cannot change stripes on a leopard, or are dangerous as a grizzly bear. You keep moving forward what Watchtower really is, it will destroy you. Many people have died by going through to get to the other side of Watchtower's false religion. Many people have died because they failed to do research. So I hope this video will open your eyes up. See the evidence for yourself. Yes, trains can kill people. People commit suicide on train tracks. People got murdered on train tracks. So it's the same as Jehovah's Witnesses religion. I've seen the warning signs. I've seen things that made no sense. But in my mind, I had to keep going forward till that train would have killed me sooner or later. Because this nonsense that's Watchtower is trying to give wisdom for you to stay in this religion, no. They're the ones that's pointing to the railroad tracks for you to commit suicide in their religion. They're the ones out there directing the path for you to go to get killed on these railroad tracks. And you look at us like we are the crazy ones? We are the ones who left this cult. We are the ones who know the real truth. So the choice is yours. All we are, just like the new technology of the train tracks, is to try to keep you alive and keep you on the right path. That's all we can do. It's your choice to commit suicide for Watchtower's false teaching. It's your fault to commit suicide being a Jehovah's Witness. That's your choice. Don't blame us for leaving. And see that proof, evidence, what is in front of us in Watchtower's false teaching. Thank you. Y'all have a wonderful day. Started.